The desert air shimmered over the airbase as frustration boiled beneath the roar of idle engines. For 3 days, the Army's top engineers had torn apart the AH-64 Apache, swapping sensors, running diagnostics. Nothing worked. The warbird refused to fly. Then, just as command prepared to declare it grounded, a black SUV rolled onto the tarmac, and out stepped a man they said hadn't touched a helicopter in 40 years. The desert heat shimmered above the runway, thick enough to taste. A broken Apache sat silent at the edge of the tarmac, its matte black fuselage gleaming like a casket under the noon sun. The air smelled of jet fuel, sweat, and defeat. 3 days, 72 hours of diagnostics, calibrations, and arguments. Yet the twin T-700 engines of the Army's prized war machine refused to cooperate. Chief Engineer Ryan Keller kicked the toolbox, the metallic clang echoing across the hangar. "That's it," he growled, pulling off his gloves. "We've replaced half the powertrain, recalibrated the sensors, and even swapped the flight control modules. Nothing. The system keeps stalling at 50% spool-up. The computer says it's fine, but it's not fine. It's dead." A cluster of young technicians watched him in tense silence. Their laptops displayed perfect green readouts. To the machine, everything was nominal. But to the pilots grounded by it, this Apache might as well have been a corpse. From across the hangar, Major Daniels, the base operations officer, approached with his arms folded. "Chief, the commander's losing patience," he said, voice clipped. "You've had full support from Fort Rucker's engineering unit, plus the GE techs on video link. If we can't get this bird flying by tonight, I'm pulling it from readiness status." Keller wiped his forehead, jaw tightening. "Sir, I don't care how many consultants we patch in. The fault's not digital. It's mechanical. Yet there's something hiding in there that the sensors can't see." Major Daniels exhaled sharply, his frustration barely masked. "We're not dealing with ghosts, Keller. The Apache's one of the most advanced platforms on Earth. Machines don't just decide not to work." "Tell that to this one," Keller muttered. The tension in the hangar felt like a live wire. Technicians whispered among themselves, glancing at the inert helicopter as though afraid it might be listening. Every test, every line of code said the same thing: no fault found. Yet the moment they tried to spool the port engine, it died like it was holding its breath. Daniels turned toward the control booth. "Run the startup again." A pilot inside the glass room nodded, flicked a switch, and the Apache came alive in a mechanical whine. The right engine roared to 60% steady as a heartbeat. The left engine coughed, staggered, then dropped to 0. The sound of silence afterward was heavier than the roar. Keller slammed his clipboard down. "That's the 10th failure!" Daniels pinched the bridge of his nose. "All right, shut it down. We'll brief the commander. Maybe it's time to accept that—" A sharp voice interrupted from behind. "Commander's already been briefed." They turned. A tall man in a crisp uniform walked in, boots clicking against the concrete. Colonel Marcus Hale, the base commander, wasn't known for patience. He stopped beside the Apache, his gaze cold and assessing. "I've been watching this circus from the tower," Hale said. 3 days, millions of dollars of tech, top engineers, and still no results. He let the silence hang before continuing. "So I made a call." Keller frowned. "A call, sir?" Hale's tone was flat. "To someone who knew this aircraft before most of you were born." The hangar went quiet. The technicians exchanged confused looks. Daniels blinked. "You mean an outside consultant?" "And, sir, with respect, we've already got GE and—" "Not them," Hale said sharply. "Used to work on these when they were still prototypes. The kind of man who didn't need a laptop to hear a bird's heartbeat." Keller laughed dryly. "With all due respect, sir, what's an old retiree going to do that we haven't?" Hale didn't answer. The sound of tires squealing outside cut him off. A black SUV rolled up to the hangar doors, dust swirling in its wake. It came to a stop beside the silent Apache. For a moment, no one moved. Then the door opened and a figure stepped out, old, broad-shouldered, wearing sun-faded overalls and a battered cap with a single patch. Army Aviation Maintenance, 1972. He paused, scanning the flight line like a man looking at ghosts. Keller muttered under his breath, "You've got to be kidding me." Hale's voice was calm, almost reverent. "Gentlemen, meet Master Chief Raymond Cole." The hangar fell silent. The legend had arrived. Master Chief Raymond Cole stood quietly at the edge of the hangar, letting the hum of the base settle around him. The younger men stared, half skeptical, half curious. The old man didn't look like a savior. His coveralls were oil-stained, his boots scarred, his hands thick and scar-mapped. Yet when he moved, every motion was deliberate, precise, economical, like someone who had spent a lifetime dancing with machines that could kill. Colonel Hale broke the silence. "Chief Cole was wrenching on Apaches before most of you knew what torque specs were." Keller folded his arms, forcing a polite smile. "Sir, I respect the service, but this is a modern AH-64E. We're talking about fiber-optic control networks, digital fuel systems." Cole's voice cut through the air, low and gravel-rough. "And you think the metal cares about any of that?" The hangar went still. Cole walked toward the silent helicopter. He didn't carry a laptop, didn't even wear gloves. He placed one calloused hand on the Apache's composite skin as if greeting an old friend. The aircraft seemed to respond with a faint creak from cooling metal. He didn't start at the engine bay where the others had clustered. Instead, he began at the tail boom, running his fingertips along rivet lines, pausing at the stabilator, tracing seams like reading braille. Every so often he'd tilt his head, listening, not to the noise, but to the absence of it. Keller sighed loudly. "Sir, with all due respect, this isn't a seance. We've run borescopes, ultrasonic scans, thermal imaging, there's nothing to find." Colonel Hale's expression hardened. "Let him work, Chief." Cole crouched beneath the fuselage, joints popping as he knelt. "You hear that?" he murmured. "Hear what?" Keller snapped. "The silence," Cole said. "That's not a dead silence. That's a wounded one." A few mechanics exchanged uneasy glances. The words shouldn't have made sense, but somehow they did. He straightened slowly, eyes distant. The smell of hot metal and fuel seemed to fade, replaced by something wetter, older, rain. Flashback. Vietnam, 1971, rain hammered the jungle clearing. A Huey sat gutted in the mud, rotor blades sagging. The wounded screamed beneath the storm. 22-year-old Raymond Cole knelt in ankle-deep water, his arms slick with oil and blood. A piece of shrapnel had sheared through the fuel manifold. No parts. No time. He'd scavenged a strip of aluminum from a wrecked truck, hammered it against a stone, drilled it with a bayonet tip. A lieutenant had shouted over the gunfire, "She'll never fly again!" Cole hadn't answered. He'd listened, to the rattle of the linkage, the rhythm of a heartbeat buried in steel. Then he'd felt it, the vibration that wasn't supposed to be there. That's where the fracture lived. Minutes later, against all logic, the Huey lifted off, coughing smoke and rain, carrying 9 wounded men out of hell. Cole had stayed behind, drenched and shaking, staring at the handmade tool in his fist. It wasn't just steel. It was survival shaped by instinct. Present day. The flash of memory faded. Cole blinked, returning to the glare of the hangar lights. The years had stolen his speed, not his senses. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather roll tied with frayed cord. When he unwrapped it, the room fell silent. Inside were tools no modern engineer would recognize, hand-forged, blackened by time, edges polished from decades of touch. "What are those?" Keller asked, trying to mask his disdain. Cole selected one, a narrow rod bent at an odd angle, its tip glinting. "The right question," he said softly, "is why?" He knelt by the left engine cowling, resting the tool against the frame, closing his eyes. Seconds stretched, the hangar filled with the faint ticking of cooling metal. Then his eyes opened, sharp and certain. "There," he said, pointing with the tool's tip. "Under the bleed air line, a pressure fracture. Small enough to hide from your sensors, big enough to choke an engine when she tries to breathe." Keller scoffed, frustration edging his voice. "That's impossible. We scanned every—" "Scans see what's still," Cole interrupted, rising to his feet. "I listen for what's about to break." Colonel Hale's gaze lingered on the old man. For the first time in 3 days, there was something new on that flight line. Not noise, not data, hope. The moment hung heavy in the air. Keller's jaw tightened, the corner of his mouth twitching. "A pressure fracture? Under the bleed line?" he said, his tone caught between disbelief and insult. "We've scoped that area twice with fiber optics, old man. There's nothing there." Cole said nothing. He simply rested his hand on the metal skin again, eyes half closed, listening. His silence was a challenge more cutting than any insult. Keller turned to Colonel Hale. "Sir, we're wasting time. I can't have an uncredentialed civilian sticking homemade tools inside a multi-million-dollar craft. This isn't some antique Huey, it's an AH-64E. If he damages anything—" Hale's expression hardened. "You're out of line, Chief." "With respect, sir, this is reckless." Before the colonel could answer, a young sergeant near the diagnostics station spoke up quietly, almost apologetically. "Sir, if I may." The man looked nervous, but his voice carried conviction. "I think Mr. Cole's right. When the left engine spools, the temperature on the pneumatic line spikes, but the sensor feed doesn't show pressure stabilization. If there's a microfracture opening under load," Keller snapped, "Sergeant, that's enough." But the colonel raised a hand. "No, let him finish." The sergeant swallowed hard, glancing at Cole. "It's not in the logs, sir, but it feels wrong. The sound changes halfway through the spool-up. I noticed it this morning." Cole gave a faint nod, like a teacher acknowledging a student who had finally heard the right note. "That's how you start listening," he murmured. Keller's frustration boiled over. "Colonel, this is absurd. We have full diagnostics teams, military contractors, and AI-assisted analysis. And we're supposed to trust a hunch from a man who probably tuned carburetors in the 70s? Cole turned toward him, and for the first time, there was steel in his voice. "Son, the bird doesn't care what year it is. It only cares whether you understand it." Something in that tone, low, calm, absolute, made Keller hesitate. It wasn't arrogance. It was experience that had been tested under fire and never broken. Outside, a gust of wind rolled dust across the tarmac. Somewhere in the distance, a jet roared skyward. Inside the hangar, silence closed in again. Keller broke first. "That's it. I'm calling this. I want him off my flight line." He stepped forward, pulling out his radio. "Security, this is Chief Keller. I need—" Colonel Hale's voice cracked low. "Ike a whip. Stand down." "Sir, I said stand down." The command froze him in place. Hale's jaw was tight, eyes unreadable. Then he turned toward his adjutant, who'd been waiting by the door. "Rank, Master Chief. Army Aviation Maintenance." The adjutant disappeared, phone all ready to his ear. The base grew tense again, everyone pretending to stay busy while waiting for whatever came next. Cole leaned against a toolbox, expression unreadable, his rough hands folded calmly in front of him. After a minute, the adjutant returned, breathless. "Sir, got it. You might want to hear this." Hale gestured for him to speak. "Master Chief Raymond Cole, Served from 1967 to 1985. Decorations include Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, 14 Air Medals, and a Legion of Merit. The young man swallowed. There's a note in his file signed by General Walker himself. It says, and I quote, "If this man ever asks for anything, give it to him. He kept our birds alive when no one else could." The silence that followed was electric. Keller's face drained of color. The other mechanics stood motionless, their earlier skepticism melting into shock. The colonel's eyes never left Cole. "So it's true," he said softly. "You're that Cole." The old man smiled faintly. "Haven't been called that in a long time." Keller took a slow step back, his bravado gone. "Sir, I didn't—" Cole stopped him with a gentle wave of his hand. "Doesn't matter. You're here to learn, not to bow. But next time, before you call a machine dead, make sure you've listened for its pulse." Outside, the sun slipped lower, turning the metal skin of the Apache into burnished gold. The air felt different now, still tense, but alive with something new. Respect, maybe, or the quiet return of belief. Colonel Hale exhaled, the faintest hint of a smile touching his face. "All right, Chief. Let's prove your theory." Cole nodded. "Let's make her breathe again." The hangar lights dimmed slightly as the sun outside began to set, washing the tarmac in amber light. The Apache looked almost alive again, its blades catching, the glow like a sleeping predator about to wake. Cole stood beside the left engine bay, sleeves rolled up, the same worn tool in his hand. The young mechanics gathered at a cautious distance, waiting for permission to breathe. He looked toward the sergeant who had spoken earlier. "You," he said quietly. "Power up the line, but hold the spool at 45%, no higher until I say." The sergeant nodded quickly, hands trembling as he climbed into the cockpit. The switches clicked in sequence. Master power, ignition, fuel flow. The hangar filled with the low whine of the turbine spooling. At 45%, the pitch deepened, that same strange flutter echoing faintly through the airframe. Cole crouched again, pressing his fingertips against the skin of the aircraft just below the bleed line. He closed his eyes. The sound became texture, vibration, memory. The others saw an old man kneeling in silence. What he felt was something different, a small pulse, out of rhythm with the machine's heart. He tapped the fuselage once. "Shut it down." The sergeant killed the ignition. The turbine's whine faded into quiet. Cole stood slowly, then pointed. "There, take that section apart. Now." His voice was calm but left no room for argument. Keller hesitated only a moment before signaling his team. They moved fast, pulling panels and disconnecting conduits until the narrow length of pneumatic line lay exposed. Under the white beam of the inspection lamp, it looked perfect, clean, polished, unscarred. Keller frowned. "There's nothing—" "Microscope," Cole said. They slid the line under the scope, adjusted focus. The room fell silent as the image sharpened. A thin, jagged fracture, no thicker than a strand of hair, ran across the inner curve of the tube. It was invisible to any sensor, unless the line was under pressure. Exactly where Cole had said. Keller leaned back owly, his voice barely a whisper. "How the hell did you know?" Cole didn't look up from the microscope. "You don't see these things with your eyes. You feel when the metal isn't right. You listen for the hesitation between heartbeats." Colonel Hale exhaled softly, awe in his voice. "Replace it. Then start her up." Minutes later, a fresh pneumatic line was in place, the panels sealed. The cockpit lights flickered alive again. The turbine whined once more, rising through its usual rhythm, 40, 50, 60, 80, until both engines roared together in perfect harmony. The hangar filled with that thunderous, steady hum. For the first time in 3 days, the Apache was alive. Cheers broke out from the crew, brief and disbelieving. The colonel smiled, just barely. Keller stood frozen, watching the numbers climb steady on his display. His chest rose and fell, the shame and relief mixing together in a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Cole simply nodded once. That's how it's supposed to sound. The colonel stepped closer. Chief, I owe you more than thanks. I owe you a lesson plan. I want every engineer on this base to learn exactly what you just taught us. Cole smiled faintly. You can't teach it from a manual, sir. You learn it by listening. Later that evening, long after the Apache had cooled and the hangar emptied, Keller found Cole sitting outside on a folding chair, watching the last streaks of sunlight fade behind the mountains. Keller hesitated, then sat down beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. I was wrong, Keller said finally. Cole didn't look over. Good. That means you're paying attention now. Keller gave a tired laugh. How do you know when you're listening, right? Cole lifted his coffee, eyes still on the horizon. When the machine stops sounding like metal and starts sounding like a heartbeat, then you know you've earned its trust. The two men sat there in the fading light, the quiet between them no longer heavy with pride or doubt, only understanding.